Oh, well, case of me actually agreeing with Polygon, sometimes these people need to go on their sexuality habits. We might feel the world is viable, the window, and right now, I don't know how to call it, but I know that you got messages, but a man basically displaying that his sexuality, that's too far. That cannot exist in this way. Thank you very much. It's like the ones that take the beauty treatment. Put the color on it and just how they do. Either way, it's a lot of doing it and nothing here. The other part was skydiving. These main characters, they know it. I think that's the wrong emoji that they use to use that emoji or that. Nothing you asked what my opinion was about when you call it coming to YouTube. And it's pretty simple. You should be able to return. There shouldn't be any problems with it. And I personally, I don't have any problems with it. I, for one, love seeing several types of build and how to create a space. Maybe playing with God or dropping the spindle. That's what I subscribe to Larry Paul. I'm glad that he is back doing what he was doing back. That's the song. Can I just say, I love this hope. It's just perfect. It just literally completely forget about everything. I guess the thing about this video is that Larry Paul initial video, I still wrote it down. It was made to make himself look better in the eye of people. That's what it is. He just did it so miserably that it was completely wrong. And at the end of the day, this video is doing the same thing. He's trying to make himself look better in the eye of suicide. There's really no difference. But the general thing to know here about it, it's okay to do that. It's okay to almost like suicide. As long as he's doing it in the right. One important note that I left in the video was that he made up with this that survived from accidentally, obviously doesn't happen. It was instant regret, and he uses that he got suicide, and it's a good story, and it's good that he's basically when I was doing everyone told me to do this and that. Everyone told me to meet with people, we need to travel around the world, and that. And so, because he's young, he needs to do interviews. And I personally thought that was very interesting. It seemed like all these people do what they do now. They really kind of not doing what I feel like doing now. It's sort of a completely thing. I just thought that's a different thing. I don't want to do that. I would rather just show people that I've seen, very well in my mind. Here we go, interview with ABC women. Not cool. I'm going to be honest with you, my book, I got that from you. Not cool. You're going to be able to do it. Because it doesn't make any sense. And I believe it happens for a reason. So apparently, because it was just kind of the topic now, and Logan Paul found a way that it happened for a reason. There's a divine, Logan Paul is in the divine path of redemption. This all happened for a reason. But what if that it wouldn't happen? No way. It's really hard to know anything that you do. Why? And you're that pain. But then, when you're not really paying for it, or can I really do thinking. I mean, really good at that. You have to think what that's that time. Don't worry about everything that happened. It wasn't Logan Paul's fault. It was your fault. Okay? You should not have let your kid watch his videos. What are you, stupid boys? Come on, man. What are you doing, man? When you put out something like this, you realize the age of your audience. It's odd because, like I told you, it's not like I'm making content necessarily for kids. 100% you're making content for kids. You know your demographic. Every YouTuber ever knows their demographic. That's how you're successful. It's in your analytics. And it's also unique though. I know people say, well, only the young ones show up at events like this and stuff like that, but no. When I did my meetups, there were older people there too. They were not just old kids. In fact, there were more young teens and or young adults than kids. You're lying. You're just lying.
I try not to live my life thinking about money.
And so, what can you repeat that, please?
I try not to live my life thinking about money.
The whole channel is built about money, Logan. It's the only thing that draws in these little kids to look up to you. Oh, look at all these flashy cars you have, the mansion. Your whole brand is built around it, Logan. Are you kidding me?
The 2017 year in review video, where do I begin? I guess I can start with this. At 42 years old, I bought my first house for $6.5 million, but I wasn't quite satisfied, so I had a koi pond put in. Painted the walls of the guest house. Bought a giant truck known as the Yeti. Bought a school bus, and then turned it into a cool bus. Installed the home theater system. Blah, blah, blah. More material out this, guys. The point is, I bought a lot of things, including this Rolex. And I try not to live my life thinking about money.
Like I said, Logan Paul should just keep making videos and be honest. That would be my advice. And as long as he's not, I'm going to call him out on it. Now, which brings back to this headline. Logan Paul went skydiving and his main parachute didn't. He posted on Twitter that he had to cut away his main parachute because it didn't open, and he had to use the blue reserve parachute. Remember the guy that jumped off the bridge and survived? Well, now Logan Paul has someone that he can relate to it. Normally, I would think better of people, but seeing Logan Paul's behavior, and I think I'm someone that can understand this sort of mentality, where you're just dishonest, I really truly think that he just jumped with the second parachute. I would not accuse people of this shit just out of superstition, but seeing all these track record of dishonesty and doing really anything to redeem your brand, I'm going to call it out. It seems too perfect for me to see him talk to a guy that jumped off the bridge and survived, and then this is going to be his first vlog, right? This is going to be his comeback vlog. I haven't seen it, it hasn't come out yet, but I'm pretty sure this is going to be his vlog. And now he gets a chance to feel that, yes, you know, I survived a jump. Now I feel the same way. And if you think I'm crazy, people are already saying it. Maybe now you'll stop seeing suicide as a joke. But yeah, this video is very specific in relation to it. Obviously, Logan knows his next vlog is going to have to be important. He's going to have some sort of message. He can't just keep making videos and move on. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. I know people will think I'm crazy, like I'm putting on a tinfoil hat or something. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it for a second. Stop being dishonest, Logan. That's all you have to do. Next, news. Pure news. That's right, we have more. Susan Wojcicki tweeted, CEO of YouTube, I think that's the position I read, that she's been listening closely to your thoughts and ideas for the past year, so I wanted to share my priorities for creators in 2018. It's a long blog post going through basically acknowledging the issues, I would say. She sort of spices on some good bits here and there, like not everything is bad. Hey, they have super chat now, and in 2017, the number of creators making six figures grew by 40%, so it's not all bad. But she did recognize the demonetization in this message, she says, but even as our platform continues to do well around the world, too many of you unfortunately have to know about it. New world in 2017 demonetization. It's nice to have it acknowledged at least. It would be nicer to see what is going to be done. I think a real good course of action would be to stop letting people have this guessing game with YouTube. You're going to have to start filling people in on what is going on and why, for example, whether it's demonetized. Whenever my video gets demonetized, I have to play this guessing game of what caused it. What was it in this 10-minute video that wasn't allowed? Was it because I re-uploading, spending so much time. And I think this is the problem with most creators. When a clip gets claimed by another company, they take all the revenue of the video. So let's say I use audio from someone that I didn't know was copyrighted or something like that. It's hard to tell. I know it's stupid you should do it, but sometimes it just happens. And they claim the video, they get all the revenue. And plus that, they don't even have to say why they claimed it or what it's claimed. There's still so many issues with the system, and they're making it harder for creators to earn the revenue that they deserve. You have really creative people really making amazing stuff that don't get the revenue. Just to give an example, we have this really creative meme video that I re-uploaded because I like to react to it. It's a really great video. It probably took a shit ton of edit to put in. And it's to display the memes of 2017. If I showed this bit in my video, the company that owns this video can claim my video and take all the revenue for this entire video just because I showed it. That's enough to justify the claim. There's so many issues, and I think that's what needs to be addressed. Stop letting YouTubers have this guessing game. I do think we are going to make an effort, and this is confidence about increasing that. I hope that season makes more certain efforts. I think it's great. There's some transparency, and generally a direct reply to the community. Let me know. Also, bitch.
So this looks like a fancy package right here. I have a special smartphone in here. It's an LG V30, the new color, the kind of, what is it called? Raspberry Rose. That sounds appetizing. When I was at CES, I got my first piece of this particular device, and I was like, how is it that I have not unboxed an LG V30? As you can see, I've got a nice little card here for Valentine's Day as well. Let's get this open. Oh my goodness, whoa! That is kind of cool. That's cool. B&O Play, this is one of the last remaining devices that cares about the headphone amplification on the headphone jack, and that's really cool. See, and this is the way a seal is meant to be. The last video we did, the sticker was just like somewhere over here. Boom! Oh, baby! Dual lens system up here. This is one of my favorite implementations because one of the lenses is a wide-angle lens. Landscape, architecture, you have that ability. Oh, cool. Bang & Olufsen headset right there. That's in the box, guys. Wow. Not only does this device keep the headphone jack, but it's actually supposedly one of the best headphone jacks on any smartphone. They're using an upgraded jack in there. Woo! Fingerprint scanner. This is also a button as well. No need for a power switch on the side. This one feels immediately a little bit lighter. Is this thing lighter than 158 grams? Let's say an iPhone 8 Plus, 202 grams, and this is 150 something. So it is quite light. Alright, so fingerprint setup time. So fingerprint unlocks with or without a clip. A fancy package right here. I have a special smartphone in here. It's an LG V30, the new color, the kind of, what is it called? Raspberry Rose. That sounds appetizing. When I was at CES, I got my first piece of this particular device, and I was like, how is it that I have not unboxed an LG V30? As you can see, I've got a nice little card here, Happy Valentine's Day as well. Let's get this open. Oh my goodness, whoa! That is kind of cool. That's cool. B&O Play, this is one of the last remaining devices that cares about the headphone amplification on the headphone jack, and that's really cool. See, and this is the way a seal is meant to be. The last video we did, the sticker was just like somewhere over here. Ooh. Boom! Oh, baby! Dual lens system up here. This is one of my favorite implementations because one of the lenses is a wide-angle lens. Landscape, architecture, you have that ability. Oh, cool. Bang & Olufsen headset right there. That's in the box, guys. Wow. Not only does this device keep the headphone jack, but it's actually supposedly one of the best headphone jacks on any smartphone. They're using an upgraded jack in there. Woo! fingerprint scanner. This is also a button as well. No need for a power switch on the side. This one feels immediately a little bit lighter. Is this thing lighter than 158 grams? Let's say an iPhone 8 Plus, 202 grams, and this is 150 something. So it is quite light. All right, so fingerprint setup time. So fingerprint unlocks with or without a click, and boom, it's back. It's nice actually. If I click down on it, then that locks the device. It makes a lot of sense. It's why you have to have a power switch and a separate fingerprint reader. Pixel 2 XL right here. Why do I have this extra button here? Why wouldn't this on the back just be a button? Okay. Now this is a OLED display. What's the resolution there? 1440p. It actually looks pretty good. You'll see if I scroll down here on the settings, I can turn the hi-fi quad DAC on or off right from that location there. I'll show you what I'm talking about regarding the wide angle. The way it's represented over here is with a single tree or 3 trees. It's not a software effect. It's not a crop effect. It's actually shifting to the other lens. Let's say you're trying to take a picture of your friend. Single tree mode. That's a pretty decent image right there. I switch to the wide lens, and whoa, look how much more is in frame. It's night and day. Standard focal length, and there's the wide one. Often, I will carry around a moment lens just to have a wide-angle shot. This should be talked about more. I mean, it's really cool what you can do with it. Wide, not wide. I mean, it's really, truly like having 2 cameras on you at all times. It's unfortunate that the dual camera setup became this thing that turns out software can do a good job of replicating. But this implementation here, this is the real reason it should exist. 2 unique focal opportunities in your pocket at all times. Average, I would say, nowhere near the Razr phone acceptable. Let's put it that way. Earbuds? If you're into music, audio, I can't think off the top of my head of someone who's putting that much focus in, certainly not at the flagship level. Experience high quality sound via hi-fi quad DAC, and look at this. Various sound presets, normal, enhanced, detailed, live. I'll select bass. There's a digital filter here, a left-right balance as well. I mean, this is something, guys, that you're not seeing out of the box on a lot of phones. I don't want to compare to the Pixel 2 XL switching DACs. I'm going to play the same song, dude. It might sound a little bit better, but especially that could be louder. The volume is almost identical. Can we get like an over-ear style headphone? When you pair this with the higher caliber headphones they included in the box, there's no doubt it sounds good. It's very clear. But there is something here kind of where it hasn't met my expectation, and that's in overall volume. You might be expecting a kind of punch you in the face type of sound. The volume is comparable to the Pixel 2 XL. If anything, the Pixel 2 XL might actually be a little bit louder. I do wish it gave a little bit more juice. There's a little bit of talk online about whether or not this DAC is being limited for some sort of safety reason, so that's a possibility as well. Okay, from a display perspective, here's a quick comparison. Pixel 2 XL, V30, we got a Galaxy S8 followed by an iPhone 10. A little bit more bluish, this is maybe a little more greenish. We're talking about OLED, and once you make that move to OLED, that's the biggest jump. You have the 4 displays. You tell me down in the comments which is the most pleasing to your eyeballs. Alright, so there you have it. That's the V30. Alright, the special color for that special person in your life. The thing about the camera probably speaks to me the most. My expectations for the DAC were a little bit higher. V30, are you going to switch over? What about the Pixel? Are you going to take the SIM card out? Is the dual lens worth it? It's hard for me to imagine that right now, but man, that wide angle thing is kind of compelling for me. I believe I would hardly ever put it on the other end. I mean, everybody gather in. There we go. Couple ammo. Nice looking, proper, optical, wide image. I might pop my SIM in it for a little bit, but as of right now, I don't think it's going to be able to displace the Pixel 2 XL in my pocket. There it is. Keeping it real with you guys. Alright, LG V30. Nonetheless, some cool stuff going on.
Today's episode of Unbox Therapy has been brought to you by the new 2018 Ford EcoSport. Let's check it out. So the thing that immediately catches my attention in here is this large 8-inch display with capacitive touch. This features
Sync 3 and the option for Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. So just like that, I have all of my touch controls mapped to the 8-inch display. This vehicle has a 10-speaker Vinyl Play audio system. Check this out. Keep the peak in the cup holder. 7 different colors: ice blue, orange, soft blue, red, green, blue, and purple. So this here will let you set the mood for any occasion, which is very helpful if you're a guy like what you do. This has also got a Wi-Fi hotspot in here using 4G LTE to connect up to 10 devices. Now the other thing that that connection allows you to do is to use an app on your smartphone to control some of the car's features and functions. You could set up a remote start, you could lock and unlock the vehicle all remotely from the app on your phone. This full work handle, you open it up and check out the cargo space that one hole will do that here. Plenty of volume. You slap those down super easy. So there you have it. Versatility in the 2018 Ford EcoSport. You got the cargo space, you got the tech to match. You guys need to check it out.
Hey guys, this is Austin. Is a $650 gaming laptop worth it? So this is the new HP Envy X360. Now while it might not look like a gaming laptop, inside it is rocking the brand new AMD Ryzen Mobile. If you bought a laptop in the last few years, more than likely it was powered by Intel. However, AMD has stepped up in a big way with Ryzen Mobile. Not only does this have a much more powerful CPU, but the graphics should be good enough for actual gaming. So it is definitely a larger laptop with a 15-inch display. But as part of their X360 line, what we're getting here is a fully convertible design, which actually isn't too thick either. Color-wise, it feels pretty nice. So we're getting a slightly sharp angular design, which a lot of HP laptops have had these days. But considering the $650 price point, it looks and feels pretty premium. Open this guy up, and we're going to see the full-size keyboard as well as the number row, as well as the Bang & Olufsen speakers. Something you won't find, however, are any stupid Intel stickers all over the laptop. Actually, there's no AMD stickers at all. For ports, there's a pretty decent selection, including HDMI, a USB 3, as well as a headphone jack. And on the other side, we're going to be getting one more USB 3.0, a USB-C that supports charging, as well as a full-size SD card slot. HP doesn't claim that this is a gaming PC, but with Ryzen 5 inside, it should be capable of some decent gaming. Not only are we getting a quad-core Zen processor, but we're also getting 8 Vega GPU cores. Now that's not going to be able to blow away some proper dedicated graphics, but the idea is that for $650, especially considering that this is a very battery-focused sort of lightweight laptop, it should give us decent gaming performance. Ryzen has proven to be pretty impressive on the desktop side, offering a lot of fast cores at a reasonable price. Thankfully, that comes across to Ryzen Mobile. So in Geekbench, while it's not quite on par with Intel's latest 8th Gen 15-watt processors, it actually performs really well compared to slightly older Core i5s. Definitely plenty of performance for pretty much any kind of normal usage. Where things get really interesting is with those Vega graphics. So it is a huge step up over something like Intel integrated graphics, and it's even on par with some of the lower-end dedicated graphics options. Now this might not sound that impressive, but consider that this is all in a 15-watt chip. It nearly matches Intel's latest and greatest on the processor side, and completely destroys them on the graphics side. And again, this is from AMD. To put this to the test, we have CSGO. Now here running at 1080p on medium, we're actually getting pretty decent frame rates. So we're averaging somewhere between the high 40s to the mid 50s, and that is definitely very playable. Obviously, ideally, you're running like okay, gamers, the day has come. This is the big one. Grand Theft Auto 5. The game was just released. I have not checked the internet, but my assumption is that sales are almost non-existent because everyone's waiting to hear my review. I'm joined now by my companion, Aaron Blair. Hello, sir. You are the digital nerd who helps me, the Sancho Panza to my digital Quijote. That's fun. You play different people this game. And there's a guy named Franklin. Trevor is like a nut freaker out kind of salt and seeds. When we start, we're going to play Michael. That's me in my
Well, really, I am the founding member. My name is Dr. Eric Bliss. I am the unquestioned tyrannical dictator of the American Empire. If you don't remember any of these countries from geography class, you're not alone. They're all micronations, self-declared sovereign states not formally recognized by the countries in which they reside. This summer, representatives from 27 micronations gathered for a summit in Gatlinburg, Georgia.
Our government philosophy is absolute monarchy based upon divine right there. And I have over 200 citizens who tend to agree. I don't think it makes us exactly a cult, but. I love your outfit. That was wonderful. I can give the tour of the house if anybody wants it. New Virginia is, and all nations for that matter, are more of a political statement than an ideology. We don't care for the way things are going in the countries we come from. And we think we could do a better job, even if it's just over a postage stamp size piece of property.
Micronations came to prominence in the 1960s, when two man-made islands declared their independence. The Republic of Rhode Island, off the coast of Italy, off the coast of the UK. The Italian government did not take kindly to Rhode Island, and in 1968, it sent forces to demolish it with its forces. Sea land fared better, surviving a hostage situation and legal troubles ranging from passport fraud to money laundering. Other micronations were founded with a wide variety of goals, including establishing a libertarian utopia, creating a matriarchal BDSM state, and circumventing drug laws. Many of these had less than ideal outcomes. However, the majority went unnoticed by society until the 90s. When previously isolated micronationalists realized they weren't alone.
I wasn't even aware that there were other micronations out there until the advent of the internet. So you get out there and start looking around like, whoa, that guy's got his own country, or that guy's got his own country.
Your Majesties, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen,
My country is an anti-state.
we now consider ourselves to be a prosperous republic. Money. What does it mean?
Hurricanes had a long tradition against the vile vermin of squirrels.
Most of my citizens never even meet me. They send in the application. I approve it. We also get a lot of people trying desperately to leave third world countries. They think that we're a country with enough land that they could move here. We can give them a citizenship, but it comes without residency.
There are absolutely no tangible benefits to being a member of the American Empire. It is purely something that someone can be happy about. Naturally, we do sell banknotes and coins and printable passports and citizenship certificates. But really, it's not a question of tangible benefit. It's a question of just belonging. And when you get right down to it, that's really one of the most powerful things in life.
Our land claim is actually on the side of a small rock. It's right here in this box, and it weighs roughly about 2 pounds.
Many micronationalists are not isolationists. They also want to shape the world around them and question what makes a state legitimate. For them, even small acts of rebellion help challenge bureaucracies and give them control over their own lives.
Some people describe it as role playing. Micronations actually hate that. This is more or less
Especially recognition of your state.
Especially for you.
My husband was an invalid for a number of years. He came up with laws and rules that we still use. When he passed away, we got about 100 condolence letters from other micronations. I spent 10 years being a caregiver. Suddenly, I didn't know what to do with myself. This fills my time. When I'm not being the queen.
Meats and stew, poultry, beef, fish, vegetables, potatoes. The NutriPot also makes delicious breads and incredible desserts. And it's the perfect way to can your favorite jams, jellies, and sauces at home. But the new NutriPot does a lot more. The NutriPot's texture feature lets you customize your meals so you get food just the way you like it. Lock in juices and flavor with the sear function. Have dinner ready when you want with the delay feature. And the NutriPot replaces your slow cooker because it does that too. And the NutriPot Smart Warm feature keeps foods hot and fresh until you're ready to serve. And never face a sink full of dirty pots and pans again. Put some thick meals in the NutriPot and the non-stick dishwasher-safe liner makes cleanup easy. The new NutriPot is also the safest cooking appliance ever created. Featuring our extensive Sure-Lock safety system, you'll guarantee years of worry-free cooking. Now make dry pasta without boiling water in just minutes. Make perfect hard-boiled eggs in no time. Get the best rice you've ever had with no work. And homemade chili full of flavor in no time. The new NutriPot replaces hundreds of dollars in appliances. Some of the cooking technology can cost hundreds, but you won't pay $300 or $200 or even $100. Call now and get the new NutriPot digital pressure cooker for our lowest price ever. Just 3 easy payments of $26.50 plus processing and handling. Your NutriPot includes the slow cooking glass lid and the cooking rack. You also get the owner's manual and recipe book, which contains more than 30 easy-to-follow recipes to get you cooking right away. You'll also get a free measuring cup, soup ladle, and knife spoon. And every new way order comes with our 90-day satisfaction guarantee and 1-year limited warranty. But wait, as part of this special introductory offer, order today and get the New Way Twister for free. The New Way Twister 7-piece kit is perfect for drinks, smoothies, and so much more. It's the fastest way to chop and dice. The New Way Twister is dishwasher safe and will quickly become one of your favorite kitchen tools. The 7-piece New Way Twister package at $40 value is yours free today. This complete cooking package, all for only 3 easy payments of $26.50 plus processing and handling. Don't wait, supplies are limited, and this special introductory offer may not be available long. When you call, ask about special offers on the stainless steel pot, and ask about the pressure cooker recipe book. Created and tested specially for the New Way NutriPot by New Way certified executive chef. And for large renewals, parties or holidays, ask about the 8-quart, 10-quart, and 13-quart New Way NutriPot. The New Way NutriPot is only available at this price for a very limited time, so don't wait. Call or go online and order now. The PCB program is a paid advertisement for the New Way NutriPot digital pressure cooker brought to you by New Way LLC.
The preceding was a paid program. The opinions and views expressed do not reflect those of Bloomberg LP, its affiliates, or its employees. The following is a paid program. The opinions and views expressed do not reflect those of Bloomberg LP, its affiliates, or its employees.
So what do your family think? Do they say there's something wrong with this young man and you don't think it's his computer? Well, it's kind of just a little thing. Have you ever thought how your life would be better off if you had gotten a better degree? I'm a weird dropout because I took college so slow. What about these jobs in that area? What was the relationship with them? You were both there at the very beginning. The wealthiest man in the world for 20 years.
how do you define leadership? What is it that makes somebody tick? You built one of the great technology companies in the world, one of the great companies in the world, and now you're building and operating one of the great foundations in it. I think it's a challenge of building Microsoft, the challenge of now running the door and being a great company. I think they have more in common with people I expect. And the idea that you find what organizations can do, where you stick to it, build a team behind that, have some step back, successes of and improve team. Now my Microsoft work was when I was very young. I started when I was 17, and that was my primary focus until 53 when I made the transition. And for the earliest part of that, I was kind of nomadic, like, you know, scared that it was weekends and college after it was kids at all. So it was incredibly fulfilling. The wife was there with the 300 pounds, full family. But when I was coming to 30s, I went to Microsoft and corporate. I didn't have the breadth of knowledge that would let me play my role as a company. I think it was just preparation. And then after I met Linda, got married, the vision of the world more broadly, thinking about where the world could go. I said, this is ridiculous. You always know you should be doing better, but you should learn more about building the team, thinking about things in a better way. So you see the positive results that you always want to be better. Let's talk about Microsoft for a moment. So you started out when you were in high school, and you were driven to be involved with computers. Were you alone, or were other people knew about computers in those days? It's a fairly special time, because computers, when I was young, were super expensive. And I spent about an hour and a half actually something to take with me to Boston that I considered substantial new technology. And so we were fascinated by what the computer could do, but very few people were getting exposed. We had to go out of our way, and we were lucky that we did well. And so then when the idea of moving the computer onto the Intel, and if you make the computer literally millions of times cheaper than one really used, so both more powerful and they're able to do on a different level, then the idea was to be very different. The factory needed the industry was really super lucky to be there when that was happening. So what do your family think? Did they say there's something wrong with this young man and he wants to get these computers? They were always obsessed with computers. That I would get that way, that I was doing overnight, that I lose the house sometimes before I went to work at night on anything. And they kind of considered really
The big moment was when I said, instead of going to part of my senior year, that I wanted to go work for a company writing software. So they were great about allowing that to be my hobby.
So you went to Harvard and you dropped out. Have you ever thought how your life could be better off if you had gotten your Harvard degree?
Well, I'm a weird dropout because I take college courses all the time. I love learning company courses and things, so I loved being a student. And there were smart people around, and you know, they fed you, and they gave you these nice grades that made you feel smart. So I feel it was unfortunate that I didn't get to stay there, but I don't think I missed any knowledge because, you know, whatever I needed to learn, I was still in a learning mode.
So in the early days, you know, you were just a college dropout. You were very young looking. Did you get taken seriously by businessmen who were much older?
For some people, that youth and geekiness was like, hey, should we trust them? You know, that's so weird. We've never seen something like that before. So yes, we had to fight for acceptance. I couldn't rent cars, so I had to take cabs around because I was too young, and you know, probably some people were a little tough. But then as we got a little bit of success, people were fascinated by this deep belief we had in software.
Okay. So when Microsoft is moving forward, you decided to take the company public in 1986. And at that point, you are a billionaire.
Yeah,
to it?
pretty close to it. Within a year of going public, I think. There's some Fortune cover that says the deal that made Bill Gates $360 million or some weird thing like that.
All right. How did it change your life, or it didn't change your life at all?
Well, that whole period of time was amazing because I was hiring people as fast as I could. I had brought in Steve Ballmer, who was very good at that, and he was helping out. You know, we had a sense of urgency that we wanted to lead the way. There was this graphics interface thing with Windows that we wanted to do. So I was super busy, and the idea that I could hire so quickly and invest and build this worldwide company was fascinating to me, but I was really busy. So, you know, if some friend had tried to call me, you know, I wouldn't have had too much time for that. I was really into building this company, and I was going out and telling people about the magic of software, which was good for Microsoft, but also helping them understand the opportunities and the huge change agent that software and eventually software plus the internet would become. So I was having fun, it was amazing, but I always thought, hey, you know, we're one step away from not, you know, leading here. We gotta keep doing better.
When you had the famous IBM contract, you won the contract to produce their operating system. Why did they let you, in effect, own it, and they had to license it? Was that a mistake on their part?
Yeah, this is before graphics interface, when you still just have text on the screen. And so the software MS-DOS was a key thing. So it got to be more of a high-end machine, including this MS-DOS. They didn't see how big this machine would be, and their legal department didn't want to take responsibility for the source code. They had a fairly limited license.
Right.
And that, we understood that this was a seminal machine and other people would do similar machines, so that was fairly advantageous to us. They didn't see the values being in the software.
Right.
They thought that the hardware was the key and software was just a sort of necessary thing. So if they had realized the vision we had, which was that software over time would be way more important than hardware, they would have negotiated probably a different deal.
You have a fair amount of money for anybody your age at that time, certainly. Did you say, oh, I'll go splurge and buy a nice car, I'll buy an airplane, I'll buy a boat, or you just didn't really care about that?
I bought one thing that was a tiny bit of a splurge, was that my first car that I owned was a Porsche 911. It was used, but it was an incredible car, and that was actually when I was down in Albuquerque, and sometimes when I would want to think at night, I'd just go out and drive around at high speed, and fortunately I didn't kill myself doing that.
And what about Steve Jobs in those days? What was your relationship with him in the early days, and how did it change?
Well, we were both there at the very beginning. The Apple I was a kit computer that Steve Wozniak designed, and he worked with Steve, and they came and offered it at various of these computer club meetings, and we went to lots of computer club meetings. So we were sort of colleagues in pitching the gospel of personal computing. We were kind of competitors. The time we worked together most intensely was after the IBM PC came out. Steve had a group, actually a small group at Apple, that was doing the Macintosh, and he came to us early on and asked us if we'd commit resources. We actually put more people on the project than Apple did, and did the early application software that used that mouse graphics interface. And so it was a huge win both for Microsoft and for Apple when the Macintosh became so successful.
When your mother first said, I'd like you to come and have dinner with me and Warren Buffett will be here, you should meet him, you didn't seem that interested. Why was that?
Well, Warren, I thought of as somebody who bought and sold securities, which is a very zero-sum thing. That's not curing disease or a cool piece of software. And the idea of, you know, kind of looking at volume curves, and that's why it was so shocking when I met him.
So your company grows, it becomes successful, becomes the most valuable company in the world at one point. At what point do you say, I've made a fair amount of money, I don't need to do this anymore, I want to do something else with my life?
1995 is a big year where we shipped a product conveniently called Windows 95, and our software's doing well. And we emerge, we had always had the greatest depth of engineering, and we were slightly the biggest, but we really emerge as the successful company. And so I started thinking about, wow, there's a lot of value here at Microsoft. What have other philanthropists done historically? So during the 90s, I'm thinking about that. My mom tragically passes away in the same year as I get married in 1994. My dad is volunteering to help out, think about the philanthropy piece. So it was in the year 2000 that I put $20 billion into the foundation, and then it became the biggest foundation at that point.
You mentioned you got married in 1994. You married a Duke graduate. How did you have time to woo somebody when you're running your company, and how much time did that take?
Well, she was an employee of Microsoft, and we had run into each other actually in New York City. We ended up sitting together in a dinner, and she's an amazing person, and kind of caught me by surprise how much that engaged my attention, even versus all this exciting Microsoft stuff I was doing. So we, dated on and off for about 5 years, and then decided to get married.
So you have decided that your foundation would focus principally, but other things as well, but principally on health in Africa and K-12 education in the United States. Is that right?
Yeah, health of all the poorest, but
Okay.
Africa's paradigmatic.
So how did you come to those conclusions that those were the two things you wanted to work on as opposed to everything else?
We talked about it a lot, so that's the decision that Melinda and I made. We wanted to take the greatest injustice in the world, something that we could make a huge difference in, and that's health. Now, we broadened that a bit by doing agriculture and sanitation and some other things. And then we wanted to take a cause that would help the U.S. Be as strong as it could, and in that case, trying to help improve educational opportunity is our big thing.
You and Melinda go into the field. Why do you feel you need to go into the field in Africa or Latin America, any part of the world where you're giving away money, and actually meet people that you're giving money to and learn?
Well, I've chosen to spend my time, and Melinda spends her time, building the foundation as an institution that really has an impact. And I get a lot of enjoyment. This is, how I've taken everything I've learned from Microsoft and the position I'm in, and helping to drive the strategy and go out and see what's going on with this work. That's my full-time job, and it's a wonderful job.
Your foundation has a certain life. It's not a perpetual foundation. Is it, I think it's 20 years after either you or your wife, the last one to live, dies, that it would end? Is that how it works?
That's right. The way that we're managing the institution and keeping it excellent and designing it to solve problems that can be totally solved. So we work on malaria. This foundation should be able to participate in getting rid of that. All these infectious diseases that so disproportionately hurt the poor and really explain most of the difference between why a poor child has a 50 times greater chance of dying than a child in a wealthy country. In 30 or 40 years, those problems should have been brought to an end. And whatever the new problems philanthropy should go after, the people who were alive then and picking great executives and building institutions to go solve, they'll do a much better job than we can just writing down a little guidance. So it is a limited time foundation.
It's so different the way he lets there be a dialogue.
When your mother first said, I'd like you to come and have dinner with me and Warren Buffett will be here, you should meet him, you didn't seem that interested. Why was that?
Well, Warren, I thought of as somebody who bought and sold securities, which is a very zero-sum thing. That's not curing disease or a cool piece of software. And the idea of, kind of looking at volume curves, and it doesn't invent anything. And so I thought my way of looking at the world, what I wanted to figure out and do, and what he looked at, that there wouldn't be much intersection. And that's why it was so shocking when I met him. He was the first person to really ask me about software and software pricing, and why wasn't IBM, with all of their strength, able to overwhelm Microsoft, and what was going to happen in terms of how software would change the world. And he let me ask him about, okay, well, why do you invest in certain industries, and why are some banks more profitable than others? And he was clearly a broad systems thinker, and so it started a conversation that has been fun and enriching, and an incredible friendship that was completely unexpected.
And he taught you how to play bridge, or did you already know?
I knew how to play bridge, but I had done it our family had done it. And then because Warren, it was a chance to spend time with Warren, I renewed my bridge skill, at first very poorly, but both golf and bridge were things that we did in our hours that we got to goof off together.
You given up on golf?
Well, Warren gave up on golf a few years ago, and so my primary excuse to play golf has gone away. So I'm golfing not much now. Tennis is become my primary sport.
Warren Buffett called you one day and said, by the way, I'm going to give you most of my money. Were you surprised when he said he wanted to give you all this money from his wealth to your foundation?
That was a complete surprise, because Warren is the best investor, and he's built this unbelievable company. And he was giving me advice about all the things I was doing. I was learning so much from him. But his wealth was devoted to a foundation that his wife was in charge of. And so tragically, she passed away. And so then he had to think that his initial plan wouldn't make sense. And much to my surprise, he decided that a part of the wealth, a little over 80% of it, would come to our foundation. So it was a huge honor, a huge responsibility, an incredible thing, because it let us raise our level of ambition even beyond what we would have done without that by most definitions, the most generous gift of all time.
And you started with Warren and Melinda, the Giving Pledge. What is that about, and how has that worked?
Well, Warren was brainstorming with us about how did philanthropists figure out what to do, and how could they kind of help share with each other without giving up the diversity of what they did. And so he got us to do some dinners with people who are already doing amazing philanthropy, and talk about how they built staff and picked causes, and not that they would give to the same things, but that they would, the quality and even how early people would get engaged would be enhanced by the people getting together and making a public commitment to give the majority of their wealth away. And so that's become the Giving Pledge group.
You're the wealthiest man in the world for 20 years or more. How does it affect your life daily? People come up to you all the time and ask for money, or they expect you to buy them things. You've gotten tired of it? When you were doing Microsoft at the beginning, you were doing the coding yourself, and you would presumably know more about coding than just about anybody. But now that you have so many other responsibilities, when Microsoft develops a new piece of software, are you able to really talk to the software engineers in the same level that you could 20 years ago?
Well, I'm certainly nowhere near as hands-on as I was when I would either write the code or look it over and hire all the programmers. And in my career, this evolution of being an individual performer, then a manager of managers, and then setting broad strategy, you have to get used to the fact you don't have as much control. But I try and understand enough about software that the trade-offs we're making about what features should we put in, what the basic design should be, I still enjoy those discussions. And even today over at Microsoft, we get to talk about, okay, what should the next Office do? How can Windows be better? How's the user interface going to change when we have speech and handwriting and those things? So I'm able to participate, but it is a way more complex field, and you know, I couldn't actually write all the code myself anymore.
When somebody turns on their computer today, they have to have 3 fingers usually, and they put a finger on Control, Alt, and Delete. And it seems a little awkward to do that. Why did you do that, and why did people have to have that mechanism to turn on the computer?
Well, fortunately, most machines nowadays have moved away from that. But the idea that we knew that there was logic in the keyboard that could detect a truly unique signal that would bypass the software that was running so you could know it was really starting over. Clearly, that ended up being an awkward piece of user interface. If we had to do it over again, we wouldn't do it. It sort of was in the chasm between Microsoft and IBM that it ended up being that way. And you know, it's kind of become the poster child of, hey, couldn't you have made this stuff a little simpler?
We love Bill! We love Bill!
So you're the wealthiest man in the world for 20 years or more. How does it affect your life daily? People come up to you all the time and ask for money, or they expect you to buy them things.
Fortunately, people know that that wealth is dedicated to the foundation. And so if they have ideas that are in the foundation's area, infectious disease, improving education, then it's super interesting to have them talk to me or talk to those people. I have the benefit of being well known, so I can go out and meet interesting people and, you know, share my views and get a lot of attention. I'd say net that's a benefit. When I'm out with the kids, then it can be, you know, a tiny bit of a drawback that you may not get as much privacy as you'd like. But overall, it, you know, my success has allowed me to, you know, get more done, build partnerships, you know, meet great people.
How do you deal with it when you want to go shopping, or you don't go to shopping?
Oh, I go shop. I go out to the theater.
And people don't come up to you
know,
all the time for selfies or something?
They can, yeah, but that's pretty quick. And people are usually very nice about it.
What about your children? Everybody who's wealthy, who has children, has to deal with how do you train your children to live with the wealth? How much do you give them? And how do you get them involved in philanthropies?
Well, our kids are young enough that the key focus is helping them, you know, enjoy learning, get a great education. All of them will pick careers that aren't related to software philanthropy. They will strike out in their own direction and be great, you know, in their own way, whatever it is they pick to do. So we've chosen that they'll have enough wealth that they'll never be poor or anything, but we're not going to take billions of dollars and have that define their life. The vast majority of the wealth is dedicated to the foundation. And so far, you know, they're great kids, and you know, they enjoy learning about what we're doing in Africa, and you know, that may shape where they go with their lives, but it'll be up to them.
When people look back on what you've done 20 years from now, 30 years from now, what would you like to have people say Bill Gates achieved?
Well, I don't think it's important for me to be remembered specifically. I do hope that infectious disease is largely eliminated as a problem so that nobody's having to talk about it and people can focus on other issues. That would be a huge, great thing. If our work has helped improve U.S. education, that would be a huge, great thing. You know, most importantly are the people who really know me, my kids, that, you know, they feel I was a good father, gave them an opportunity to go create their own life.
Thing is just about assigning yourself the right story. I didn't want to go to college, though my dad wanted me to go to college.
Why did you come back to Omaha?
When I came back, I had about $175,000, and I thought that was all I would need to live the rest of my life.
Have you ever run into that guy again?
No, he needs protection now.
When you had your first annual meeting, how many people showed up at that?
Well, we had 12, but you had to count my Aunt Katie and my Uncle Fred.
Any word of advice you give to somebody who's a young investor who would like to emulate you?
Would you fix your tie, please?
Well, people wouldn't recognize me if my tie was fixed, but okay. Just leave it this way. All right. I don't consider myself a journalist, and nobody else would consider myself a journalist. I began to take on the life of being an interviewer, even though I have a day job running a private equity firm. How do you define leadership? What is it that makes somebody tick? Appreciate it.
Welcome to the
Thank
financial
you.
capital of the world.
All right, well, right. All right. We're at your favorite restaurant in Omaha, Gorat's. Why do you like it so much? Is it the food or the price or the combination of both?
It's the food and the price and the heritage. 4 generations of the Garat family were involved here. Pal Garat and I went to grammar school together, and so I've known the people over the years. The steaks are great, you know, the prices are right, so.
Had lunch here earlier today. It was very good and it wasn't that expensive, and I quite enjoyed it. A lot cheaper than New York and Washington.
A lot. That's why I buy people lunch here, and then they can buy me the lunch in New York.
Oh, it's a good deal. Good arbitrage. You grew up in Omaha, but then you moved to Washington when your father became a congressman.
Right.
How did you start your business career in Washington with various pinball machines or golf businesses?
Yeah, I always like to have a couple of businesses going, and the best business we had was the pinball machine business, which was the Wilson coin-operated machine company, and that was named after the high school my partner and I went to. But we had our machines in barber shops, and the barbers always wanted to put us in machines with flippers, which were just coming in. But those machines cost $350, whereas an old obsolete machine cost $25. So we always told them we'd take it up with Mr. Wilson, the mythical Mr. Wilson. He was one tough guy, I got to tell you.
So when you graduated from high school, you weren't as interested in academics, I assume, at that time?
I was not interested.
And your high school yearbook said he's likely to be a stockbroker, but he's very good in math. Why did you go to Wharton, and why did you only stay 2 years there?
I didn't want to go to college, but my dad wanted me to go to college. And we didn't have SATs then, but he practically would have done the SATs for me. So in the truth, I always wanted to please my dad. I mean, he was a hero to me and still is. But so he kept kind of jollying me along and said, well, why don't we just fill out an application for the hell of it? And so he suggested Wharton, and I applied there, and they let me in. And after the first year, I wanted to quit and go into business. And my dad said, well, give it 1 more year. And so I went the second year, and I said, I still want to quit. And he said, well, you know, you've got almost enough credits. If you go to Nebraska, which I was quite willing to do, for 1 year, you can get out in 3 years. So that's what I did.
Has Wharton ever called you up and said, well, you're a half graduate, you should give us some money, or they never bother you?
So far, they haven't tried that line, but they may after they watch this.
So after that, you wanted to go to business school?
Yeah, I'd won some minor scholarship at Nebraska to go to any graduate school I wanted to, that they'd give me $500. And so I applied. My dad suggested Harvard, so I applied.
And you didn't get in?
I didn't get in. I mean, it took 10 minutes for the guy near Chicago interviewed me. So I spent about 10 hours going to see him, and he looked at me and he said, forget it. And
have you ever run into that guy again, or have you ever heard from him since?
No, he needs protection now.
So I guess Harvard doesn't come after you for money because they turn you down. But you went to Columbia Business School, and why did you go to Columbia?
Well, I was at the University of Omaha, what was then called the University of Omaha's library, in August, and I was leafing through catalogs, and I just happened to see that Columbia had Graham and Dodd as teachers, and I'd read their book, but I had no idea that they were teaching. So I wrote Dean Dodd, and I said, dear Dean Dodd, I said, I thought you guys were dead. And I said, but now that I found out you're alive, I'd really like to come to Columbia if you can get me in.
So you did, I assume, pretty well at Columbia Business School?
I did okay there, yeah.
You worked for Mr. Graham and his partnership, and how did that work?
Well, it was terrific in the sense I was working for my hero, but Ben was going to retire in a couple of years, and so I was only back there about 1.5 years. But every day I was excited about being able to work for him.
So what you were good at was picking stocks, according to his formula, which was to look for companies that were undervalued. Now we call it value investing. Did you realize that he had some principles that were very unique, and is that why you followed his guidance?
Well, by the time I went to work for him, I probably could have recited the words in his book better than he could have. I'd read his books multiple times, and so it was more a question of being inspired by him than it was by learning something new from him.
Why did you come back to Omaha?
I wanted to come back to Omaha. I had made many friends in New York. I had a lot of friends in New York, but we had 2 kids by that time, and I lived in White Plains. I'd take the train, and I'd take the train back, and it didn't strike me as much of a life compared to being here in Omaha. And both sets of grandparents were alive at that time, and it just, and uncles and aunts, and Omaha was a more pleasant place to live.
All right, so you buy a house here.
I rent a house.
You rented a house.
I rent a house for $175 a month.
Okay, and when did you buy your house that you're still in?
In 1958. My third child was on the way.
So you started a partnership here, and how did you raise money?
Well, David, actually, when I came back, I had about $175,000, and I thought that was all I would need to live the rest of my life. I could take care of everything. So I really planned to go to school. I thought about going to law school.
Just think how successful you could have been as a lawyer.
That's true. I've regretted it ever since.
I know. So in your first partnership, when you had people cobble together some money, how much money did you actually cobble together?
Well, we met one night in May, early in May of 1956, and there were 7 people there, aside from myself, and they put in $105,000, and I put in $100. So we started with $105,100, and I gave them a little piece of paper called the ground rules.
But then ultimately you ended that partnership, I thought.
Well, what happened was that between May of 56 and January 1st of 62, I started 10 more partnerships. I made a mistake. I had no secretary, no accountant or anything. So every time I'd buy a stock, I'd break it into 11 tickets. I'd write 11 checks. I kept 11 sets of books, filed 11 tax returns, and I did it all myself. I took delivery of all the stocks because I was worried it was other people's money, so I'd go down to the bank and have these things delivered, drafted. Finally, I got wise, and on January 1st, 62, I put all 11 of the previous partnerships together in something called Buffett Partnership. I ran that till the end of 1969, at which time I dissolved it.
You dissolved that one, but then in 1969 you started a new partnership?
No, in 1969 I mailed, by that time we had about $105 million in the partnership, and about 70 million or so of that was in cash to be distributed, and the balance was in 3 stocks, mostly Berkshire Hathaway, that I distributed pro-rata to everybody.
Okay. And then you started buying more stocks through the vehicle Berkshire Hathaway?
Stocks and businesses, yeah.
What would you say is the reason for your ability to do this? Is it that you studied the companies more than anybody else? You stuck to your principles? You're smarter than other people? People were just caught up with fads? You didn't get caught up with fads? What would you say is the reason for this success?
Well, the first 2 to quite an extent. We bought businesses that we thought were decent businesses at sensible prices, and we had good people to run them, but we also bought marketable securities in Berkshire. Over time, the emphasis shifted from marketable securities over to buying businesses.
What was the theory behind buying a railroad? Because people thought they were kind of fossils as businesses.
The railroad business had a bad century. They're kind of like the Chicago Cubs. Right. Everybody has a bad century now and then.
The David
Over the years, you've bought a number of companies and had stakes in companies. One of the ones that I know very well is Washington Post. How did that come about?
Well, in 1973, the Washington Post company had gone public in 1971, right about the Pentagon Papers time. But in 73, the Nixon administration was, through B.B. Rebozo, who was a pal of Nixon's, they were challenging the licenses of 2 of the Florida television stations the Post owned. So the stock went from 37 down to 16. Now, at 16, there were about 5 million shares outstanding. So the whole Washington Post company was selling for $80 million. And that included the newspaper, 4 big TV stations, Newsweek, and some other assets, and no debt to speak of. So the Washington Post company, which was intrinsically worth $400 or $500 million, was selling for about 80 million in the market. We bought most of our stock at about the equivalent of 100 million in the market. And it was ridiculous. I mean, you had a business that unquestionably was worth 4 or 5 times what it was selling for. And Nixon wasn't going to put them out of business.
When you're doing these analyses then and now, do you have computers that help you, or how did you actually read all? Did you just get printed materials, or how did you, in those days, get the materials to read about the Washington Post? And how do you do it today?
Well, pretty much the same way, except there's fewer opportunities now. But I met Bob Woodward back, and he'd just come out with All the President's Men, and all of a sudden, as below 30 years of age, he was getting quite wealthy, and we had breakfast or lunch over at the Madison Hotel. And he said, "What do I do with this money?" And I said, investing is just about assigning yourself the right story. I said, imagine Ben Bradley this morning said to you, what is the Washington Post company worth? What would you do? You have to write the story in a month. You'd go out and interview TV brokers and newspaper brokers and owners, and you'd try and value each asset. I said, that's what I do. I assign myself the right story. And it's nothing more than that. Now, there's some stories I can't write. If you ask me to write a story on, what is some glamorous but non-profit making business worth, I don't know how to write that story. But if you ask me to write a story on what is Potomac Electric Power worth or something like that, I can write the story. And that's what I'm doing every day. I'm assigning myself a story, and then I go out and...
So you get the annual reports, and then you read them, just like other people might read novels. You read annual reports.
That's right.
And then do you do the calculations of what things are worth in your head, or do you have computers that help you?
No, if you need to carry something out to 4 decimal places, forget it.
Today, do you use a computer today even?
I use it to play bridge. And I use it to go to search.
To search.
A lot, yeah.
So there's a computer in your office you use for
I don't use them. I don't have one in the office, but I have one at home.
And like for a smartphone, if somebody wants to, get a hold of you, can they get a hold of you on a smartphone or a mobile telephone?
No, a smartphone is too smart for me.
And a computer you use rarely?
Well, I use it quite a bit. One of the trick questions that Bill Gates and I give when we're talking to audience is, who's on the computer more, excluding email? And the answer is I probably am, because I probably play 12 hours a week of bridge on it, and then I use it a lot for search.
But who do you play bridge with? Is it anonymous people on bridge? Or
No,
is it regular...
my name is T-Bone, and I play with a woman in San Francisco who goes by the name of Sirloin, and she's a 2-time world champ, and I'm 2-time world chump. So we're good. We've been playing together for decades.
And are you at a world-class level after all these
years?
No.
You couldn't have a better teacher than she is, but the student had limitations.
Now, you mentioned Bill Gates. How did you actually come to know Bill Gates?
It came about because Meg Greenfield, who was the editor of the editorial page of the Post, called me in the late 1980s, and she said, Warren, I've always loved the Pacific Northwest. She'd grown up there. And she said, I want to know whether I have enough money to be able to afford to buy a house, kind of a vacation-type house, on Bainbridge Island near Seattle. And I said, Meg, anybody that calls and asks me whether they got enough money does have enough money. So ones that don't call, that don't have it. So she bought the house. So she invited me and Kay Graham and a few people out to the house. And she knew the elder Gateses. So she called Mary Gates. And then Mary went to work on Bill to try and get him to come. And Bill said, I'm not going to go down there and meet some stockbroker or something. And Mary was a very firm type and said, you're coming. And he said, I'm not coming. And finally, they started negotiating hours. And she said 4 hours. And he said 1 hour. And this went back and forth. And he came down. And when we met, we talked for about 11 hours straight without being interrupted.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of the relationship.
Yeah, we hit it off.
But you never bought any of his shares, or you just never...
I bought 100 shares just to keep track of what this young kid was doing.
Okay. And he's now on your board, is that right?
That's correct.
So the relationship has become very close, and you get involved with him in many philanthropic things as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of fun talking.
So let me just ask about the philanthropic things that you've done with Bill and with Melinda. How did that idea of giving away your money to somebody else's foundation come to you?
Well, I originally had planned that my first wife would handle the disposition of, well, everything that we had. And we came to that conclusion when we were in our 20s. And we started something called the Buffett Foundation over 50 years ago. But I didn't give away a lot of money during those intermediate years because I felt I was compounding at a rate that I could give away billions instead of millions if I waited a little while. She died in 2004, so that plan disappeared, and then I was faced with the question of how do I give away this money in a way that that goes to the people I want without me doing all the work.
So you called Bill or Melinda one day and said, guess what, I'm going to give you the bulk of my fortune. What was their reaction?
It wasn't quite as elegant as that, actually. I've been asked that, and I don't remember that clearly, but I just, at some point I did call them up. It was done over the phone, I think.
And you didn't ask them to say, well, call the Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett Foundation?
No,
You didn't want your name on it?
No, I did not think that would do any good.
So you're on the board of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation now?
That is true, but they run it. I'm going to give them a stock tip now. Okay.
What would you say are some of the highlights, the deals that you're most proud of? Let's take one that you did recently. The biggest deal you've ever done was Precision Castparts. It's about $37 billion in purchase price?
Yeah, it was between 32 and 33 billion of cash, and then we assumed about 4 billion of debt.
Okay. So how much, to spend $37 billion, you spent a year studying the company?
No.
How much time did you spend with the CEO?
I met the CEO, I think, on July 1st of last year, and he happened to be calling on certain shareholders, and one of the fellows in our office had a position in the stock for some time. So it was an accident I met him. If I'd been out playing golf or something, it never would have happened. But I went in and I liked him. I heard him talk for 30 minutes, and I then said to the fellow in our office, I said, call him tomorrow and say if he would like to receive a cash bid from Berkshire Hathaway, we would supply one, and if he wouldn't like to receive one, forget we ever called.
That was it? You do hire any investment bankers to help you with the analysis?
No.
Do you ever hire investment bankers to help you analyze a company?
Not to help analyze a company. Sometimes they are involved in the deal, and we're perfectly willing to pay a fat commission.
One time you told me a story about how an investment banker was hired by somebody you were going to try to buy.
What happened on that was I said we'd pay $35 a share for a company, then American Energy, and they hired an investment banker, and the investment banker came out and spent about a week, and they wanted to send a big bill at the end, and they said, well, you've got to increase your price to make us look good. I said, I'm not really worried about whether you look good. So they hung around almost for about a week, and finally they called up and sort of pleaded and said, can't you increase your price somewhat so that we can send a bill and get paid appropriately for our non-services? And so I said, okay, you can tell them we'll pay $35.05, and you can say you got the last nickel out of me. So that's what we paid, $35.05.
Right. Normally, you make a price, and you don't.
Right.
And do you ever do any unfriendly deals?
No.
Why is
Although
that?
you can say Berkshire Hathaway originally was an unfriendly deal. But no, we're just not interested. Not that unfriendly deals are necessarily bad. I mean, there are managements that should be replaced. But
now, people must call you every day and say, I have a deal for you, it's perfect. And how often do any of these deals ever pan out?
They don't call every day, and we've made our criteria fairly clear. So there's relatively few that call, and when somebody calls, I can usually
Best. 问题，但是如果生存的话，就有可能会有一定的问题。